off, welcome. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us and providing knowledge. Satish, can you give us some recommendations on how you begin at this point in the season with your roses, your award-winning? Let me take you off mute.
Okay, whether it is exhibition roses or garden roses, the care is all the same. I say that in your list on things to discuss, we're supposed to discuss the summer issues. People say summer means bad news for roses. When the temperature gets high, roses don't do as well. But there are two components to it. One is the heat itself that makes the roses smaller in size, fewer in petals, and lighter in color or faded color. However, the bigger component of this is the Rosarians walking away from their rose garden for the summer and taking a break. That's how the trouble starts. Over the years, I've found out that if you stick with it, do everything you're supposed to do during the summer, your roses will do much better and you won't see that big a difference. The size will be just a little bit smaller, but the numbers will be higher and they will keep on blooming and they will be happy. Most important things to do are keep the beds weeded and well mulched, water as needed, at least 2 to 3 times a week deeply, and then removing all the blind ends and opening up the centers. I call it a boxwood type rosewood. What it means is if you look at a rose bush, you can't see anything behind that because it is full of leaves, many of which may be blind ends. So you should remove all those blind ends from the center, open it up, and that's about the most important thing.
Great, thank you. Lou?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have out here in Arizona and the really, really hot areas of the country is that we have unyielding heat for at least 6 months out of the summer. And sometimes it stretches into 7 where we have 100 degrees plus every day. And it is brutal. And we had a real curve thrown at us this year. In March, it hit 100 degrees, believe it or not. So what we've done over the years, when we first started growing roses, me and my wife Diane, we followed all the advice of the veteran rose growers, and what they did out here is they basically bought a bale of hay or a bale of straw, ran over it with their lawnmower, and then they had small pieces of straw, and then they put it over the rose bed, and that was their sole source of trying to protect the roses for the summer. They didn't do anything for the upper part of the roses, so that was a problem. But anyway, we did that for about 10 years, and we found that it just flatly did not work. They also said do not fertilize during the summer, which was wrong. And I don't mean to expose them for bad advice. It's just what they did in those days, and they didn't know any better. So we did that, and we found when we went into September, basically we had very little foliage left and a lot of burned canes, and it was terrible. And then when we wanted to cut it back slightly for the fall shows in November, we couldn't really do it because if you cut it back a little bit and you cut off the foliage, then you're causing the roses to die, where they would start turning black each cane from the bud union going upward. It was a horrible, horrible thing. And but you still tried to do it so that you'd have some nice blooms. You didn't want to have the real puny growth coming out of the cane. So anyway, what we developed over the years is a real system that works fantastic for brutally hot climates. And number one, what we did is we invested in shade cloth. And the structure is what you really need to focus on first. And we found that there were different vents that they have out here in Tucson and Arizona where they have structures made out of conduit and different fasteners that similar to the old Tinker toys, but they're made out of conduit basically. And then they have thumb screws that you can tighten, and then you don't have to go to of using wood, which termites might get into. And then they have base plates which you can attach to the ground, and they were 10 feet tall, and they're basically on our website with the Tucson Rose Society, it's Tucson, Tucson, rosesociety.com. There's an article there that it's under in 10 important rose growing articles. And the one that I'm steering you toward, it's called It's 110 Degrees, Now What Do I Do? And it gives a whole rundown of what to do as far as how to build one of these structures. And they're great, but the key thing is you got the 1 inch in diameter conduit. You can't use a smaller one because heavy winds of 70 miles an hour and up are going to twist it into a pretzel and be unusable. So we found that works well, and we've had many 70 mile per hour winds, and it works fantastic. The other part of the equation on that is we just have a 20 by 30 foot area in our backyard that houses all of our roses, so we can get them all under the shade cloth. Use 63% shade cloth. We tried 75%, and it's way too much shade. We had just spindly growth. It does not work. And we found after about 10 years later, when I tried it again and got more shade cloth, I found 63% out here works very well. And so anyway, when you do that from about early April to about early November, we put that up when it starts getting 90 degrees, and we do not take it down until it's 90 degrees or under again in November. And that has allowed us to have foliage that goes all the way from the bottom of the plant all the way to the top during that whole period when it's brutally hot. And the other equation that we've got to do is we fertilize once a month. And on May 1st, what we do is we use Osmocote, a handful on the soil of each rose, and then we use Milorganite, a handful on the soil of each rose, and then once a month in June, July, August, and September, we put 1 handful of Milorganite on the ground. And Osmocote, it's a 6-month variety where every time you water the plant, you're giving it a little bit of fertilizer, which is perfect. You don't want to overdo it, obviously, in the summer when it's that hot. And Milorganite, what makes that so good, it's basically sewage sludge from Milwaukee, and it's an outstanding product. It's got 4% iron, which allows the foliage to stay nice and green too, and it's got other slow-acting ingredients too. So, but by doing that, you're not out there and going to die of heat prostration or pass out or anything where you're overdoing liquid fertilizing and anything that really helps. And then the other thing that is vital to our program, we have very little humidity during the summer until we get the rains that start coming in July. But even then, we get very little rain out here. What we do is every morning, I bought a device that's called a Fogg-It, FOGG-IT nozzle that you screw on the end of your hose. And it basically looks like it's a brass nozzle which looks like 3 Apollo rocket engine boosters, and the water comes out at a very heavy volume. That's the one you want to get, the Fogg-It nozzle, the heavy volume one. You don't want to get the other ones because it doesn't come out with enough and it doesn't allow you to get underneath the foliage. Well, what you're trying to do is basically prevent spider mites from taking place and also adding humidity. And then when you do this whole program of shade cloth, you're spraying them off once in the morning. And we only have 50 roses, so it doesn't take more than 10 minutes to spray everything off really well with water to keep the spider mites at bay and add the humidity. And then obviously the fertilizing, it works really well out here. And we have great foliage going into the end of September. And then we're able to prune back a little bit, just very lightly for the fall shows. And then we get great growth then. So that's been our solution to a big problem with the heat.
Great. Thank you so much, Ray. At this point, what's the major objective and project as you're going into summer for your roses?
Well, North Florida, it gets hot. I mean, really hot. And, rain only comes every now and then. We actually have some nice rain going on now, which everything appreciates. But a lot of, like what Satish said, for me, my major issue in the summer is spider mites. And to get rid of those, I don't use any pesticide or anything. I just get out the water wand and get out there and wash them down really good. So I get wet, the roses get wet, and the spider mites go away for a little while. I do preventative spray just to keep the any diseases away. And a lot of what I grow, especially the minis and floras, are all in pots. I mean, ranging from a 3-gallon pot up to a 25-gallon pot. So it's a project to make sure that they all stay hydrated enough. But, I'm retired, so, what else am I going to do but go out and water roses? For some of them, it's every day, and some of them, it's every few days through the summer. So it's mainly keeping them hydrated and trying to keep the foliage on them. And like Satish says, keep the middle cleaned out so that, they're able to breathe. For me, it's just trying to get them through the summer as best I can, so that if there's a fall show around that I can drive to, or a national, I'm gonna do my best to keep the bugs and the diseases away. That's by the preventive spraying and keeping them hydrated. The stuff that's in the big pots, fertilizing for me. I'm getting ready to do another organic, the second organic application for this year, and then I'll start putting using liquids. I use it, make a 32-gallon garbage can full of liquid fertilizer, and then scoop it out 1 gallon at a time and spread it. So that takes up, a couple hours to do everything. But that's my summer program.
Wonderful. Thank you. And back to Satish. At this point, do you transplant roses or just leave everything as is? And do you move it to another location?
Transplantation is a very interesting question. You can transplant whatever is grown in a container, like the plastic nursery containers, because it's just like taking it out like a cupcake and placing it in the garden and then backfilling, provide shade for a couple of days and give water, they're happy. But if you're thinking about picking up a rose that's already growing in ground, this is a really, really bad time to do that. You have to wait basically until after November when weather cools down, or in early spring. Those are the best times for transplanting a rose from ground from one place to another.
Great, thank you. Lou, do you have any advice on transplanting versus just letting things take their time? I've sent you an unmute request, Lou.
You're muted, Lou.
Okay. Yeah, in our difficult climate during the summer, we just don't transplant anything as a general rule. And just to let everybody know, we have all of our roses in pots. We have most of the hybrid teas, or all the hybrid teas, in 24-inch in diameter pots that we got from Acclaimed mills. And they're a special plastic pot where they have some sort of chemical on it where they'll last about 20 years or more, which is shocking in this climate. Normally pots don't last more than a couple of years, but they work really well. And then for the miniature roses, we go to Tractor Supply, and they have these pots that are mainly used for horses that are about, I'd say they're about 18 inches in diameter, but they're food grade plastic, which Dr. Tommy Cairns has always told me, if you can get something made of food grade plastic, if you're going to use a pot, that's the best, because they're much thicker than the normal nursery pots. And it's true. And then you just drill holes on the bottom. But yeah, we just put everything under shade, that 63% shade cloth, and wait until December before we do anything transplanting wise. And then we do it in early December. And we try to get, if we're going to get roses in, if we can get them in November, that's ideal. Then it'll give them several months to get acclimated to our climate before the hot weather sets in. So basically our whole goal during the summer is to keep the spider mites out of there And then number two is to just have foliage from the bottom of the plant to the top. And if we can do that, I'm a happy camper, because then everything's going to be good going into the fall, where you get a great bloom cycle in November. So, but no, we don't transplant anything starting now, because it's about ready to get up 100 degrees daily. We haven't quite got there yet, except for that warm spell in March. But next week is supposed to get up to 100, and it's going to be unrelenting. It'll be like a hostage crisis. We try to stay indoors as much as possible, but it's brutal. And I know in South Carolina and Florida and Texas and many of the other states, it can get brutally hot. And you try to not go outside if you can, but you got to tend to your roses and take care of them too. If you don't, they're going to have a lot of trouble getting through.
Thank you. Moving on to Ray. Ray, do you have any insight on this topic, transplanting roses or adding a new one?
I do a lot of stepping up in all the potted roses. I'll get a small plant or something that I've had to root, and I'll start that like in a 1 gallon pot until at least it blooms and I can see whether it's something I should have kept or not. And, I'll step it up from a 1 to a 3 or a 5. And, I keep stepping them up. I do some of it, well, most of it during the late spring and summer. It doesn't seem to bother them to step it up from one pot to another one. And taking them from a pot and, if they've earned the place, to taking them a pot and putting them in the ground, that's relatively easy to do from pot to ground. Just good potting soil and keeping them watered and mulched for a while. I have had just a bit of success taking something from the ground and putting it in a large pot. If it's something in the ground that's not performing very well, but I kind of want to keep the plant, I'll water it really, really well for a couple of days. And then I'll take out a large root ball and then put that in a pot. And I'll keep it, mostly shaded for, a week to see if the transplant, if the move was successful. But, a lot of times it doesn't in the heat. Lou, where do you live?
Unmute, Lou.
Okay. Yeah, we live in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay. I use shade cloth, but I only put that on. I have a mister right back where I do all the rooting, and when I do some grafting, and the sun gets hot, and it can get hot in that mister. So I got like a 60% shade cloth that I just cover it with. It kind of cools it down and keeps the blast of sun off of it. But that's the only shade cloth. The only place that I use it.
Thank you so much. So, Ray, I do have a question though. You said if it earned a spot. Can you please tell me more about that metric? Which roses earn a spot?
Okay. Everybody, you start getting the catalogs in the fall, and you look at the pictures and, ooh, that's so pretty. And, you order it, you get it. And, regardless if it's a hybrid tea or whatever, whenever it comes in, it goes in a pot. And, it might stay there for 2 years. And if it will do well in my climate and it'll bloom really nice, it's earned a spot. But if it's, one of those things that doesn't like the heat, humidity of Florida, and I can't, I'm a show guy. I show roses, and I don't grow a whole lot that's not a show rose in some way or other. So if I don't think it's going to make the grade, it might go live in the neighbor's yard, or I'll give it away at a society meeting. But it's got to show me whether it's going to be productive as a show rose before I'll keep it. I'd probably give away a lot of nice roses, but I just have a standard, that I like to keep. And there's probably 1 or 2% of roses in my yard right now that they're on the fence. So, in a couple of months' time, they, may live elsewhere, but, everything else, if it looks like it's going to do well and perform well after 2 years, well, it's earned a spot.
Great. Thank you for indulging my curiosity about what constitutes as earning a spot. So our next question is discussing fertilizers. So Satish, could you enlighten us about how you decide and what to look for when you're buying fertilizers?
Yes, that's a topic that's very close to my heart. But let me make a statement at the beginning of this. Fertilization is a vastly overdone process. It has lost the true meaning and intent of it. What fertilization means is simply providing what is not in your soil. For that, you have to have a soil test, and it should say it's deficient in potash or phosphorus or nitrogen or what have you. Just taking something off the shelf, saying this is good for roses and putting it on the soil is not good fertilization. Actually, adding things that are already in the soil is waste of money, and sometimes it can cause pretty bad effects too. So mostly, nitrogen does not stay in the soil for very long in available form, so it gets washed away or goes back into atmosphere by denitrogenation. So that's one thing you can apply without a soil test, a very small amount, such as 1 tablespoon of urea per plant per month, no more than that. Everything else, you have to have a soil test. So all the so-called rose fertilizers have a high middle number. Why? Nobody can answer that question. They all have, you have seen them, 10, 30, 20, or 5, 55, or things like that. Oh, welcome, Ray. But truth of the matter is, too much phosphorus has been shown to be damaging the soil. It's not good for the soil organisms, soil life. It will lock down other things such as calcium and iron and so on and so forth. It reduces uptake, plant uptake. So do not apply any fertilizer on any schedule or any formula recommended by another expert. Then people will come back by saying, okay, what about organic fertilizers? Organic fertilizer is nothing but a concentrated form of compost. What I mean by that is a typical compost has about 1% nitrogen and 0.5 and 0.5 of potash and phosphorus. A so-called granular organic fertilizer may have 10 nitrogen. So that's all that is. And there are many, many, many sources. Fish emulsion, if you look at it, it's not really organic. They call it organic. The first number is 5. If you look at the label, it'll tell you that the 5 is attained by adding nitrogen fertilizer to it. So I asked the manufacturers, why do you do it? They say that is to standardize the first number. Therefore, even that is not a true organic fertilizer. Typically, whatever you call as organic fertilizers don't cause any problem in the summer. Chemicals sometimes do. The main reason for that is whenever you apply chemical fertilizers, there has to be an adequate amount of water. Otherwise, the plants will get into trouble by hypersalinity immediately. So throughout the season, all I add is a lot of compost in the spring and again in fall. And in between, I just add nitrogen, 1 tablespoon per plant per month. And my roses are as happy as they can be.
Great, thank you. Lou, do you have any insight on fertilizers, how much based on, particularly because Arizona is such a different climate? So if you'll unmute and share your wisdom.
Okay, yeah, as far as Arizona, yeah, there are many other places in Southern California, in the Palm Springs area, and Texas and Oklahoma, and holy cow, there's a bunch of places around the country that have to deal with intense heat. And last few years, even more than ever. But what we found is I went through about 20 years of having different pH tests on our soil. And then not only that, we did leaf samples, pH tests to find out what actually we need. And that's where I really agree with what Satish said. You better know what you've got and what you don't have in your soil. And then you'll have a game plan for what to do so you don't overdo it and poison your soil and your plants, and the same thing where you're overdoing it. But the problem that we have that makes them even more difficult is all of our roses are in pots. So during the summer when it's 105, 110, we're watering daily. And I don't water it with a drip system or a sprinkler system or anything like that. I do it all by hand. And I use a hose and a water wand. And I don't get the cheapy water wands that you get at Home Depot or Lowe's, because they only would last a year out here, and then they break or have a leak in near the handle on the very where it connects to the hose. So I made my own out of copper tubing, and I was trying to pretend that I'm a plumber, which I'm not. But it's not really pretty, the joints that I soldered, but it's lasted over 25 years so far, and it's been great. But anyway, I hand water. And I think it's important to do that. Then you see everything that the water is going on, and works really, really well. And one little thing, it sounds very, very basic, is you better make sure that when that water is coming out of your water wand, that you first wait a couple minutes to make sure it's not scalding water. We've got a good friend of ours in Phoenix who's a great rose grower and exhibitor named Mike Jepson. He actually found that water was coming out of his, he liked to water early in the morning, all of his rose plants, and he found that the water was almost 130 or 140 degrees when it was coming out of his watering system. And the city of Phoenix could not determine what was causing it, but because you'd think it'd be in the afternoon when it's the hottest, but it can be at any time apparently. So just be careful with that. And so anyway, with the amount of water we're putting on, that's why I like to put on that Osmocote. And with micronutrients, a 6-month blend, that seems to work really well with our potted roses like that. And then putting on that once only in the 1st of May, and also putting on Milorganite, again, a handful for each of them, each of the plants on the soil. And Milorganite is a slow release fertilizer too, which is outstanding. Many, many years ago, the Cleveland Indians had a great groundskeeper named Emil Bossard, who that's all they ever used was Milorganite. And they had the best grass you could ever see over there in Cleveland. So I'm not from Cleveland, I'm a native of Tucson, but they would always spring train in Tucson, and got to know a little bit about what he did and have such fabulous greens. And anyway, it does work out here, and it works in Las Vegas and many other places that are brutally hot. But again, one of the keys is watering enough that, and in our case, we have to water once a day during the summer. It's not something I enjoy doing, but surprisingly, we don't have a water bill really over a couple $100 during the summer. And there's some people that have $600-700 water bills, but they're watering so many different things. It's insane. And you know, some of the folks in Phoenix, they used to flood irrigate, where they would flood fields that are an acre big, and they're scaling that down because you have to out here now with water rationing to a point, and with different states fighting over water rights from the Colorado River and things like that. So you got to be cognizant of that as well. But anyway, by doing that during the summer, where you're watering daily in our climate, and then adding the slow release fertilizers that I discussed with Osmocote and Milorganite, it really, really allows you to do it at a minimum of time, and it's so you're in and out of there as quickly as possible, and it works very well out here.
Well, Ray, it's on you for discussing fertilizers. Unmute, please, Ray.
Right at the bottom of the screen, do you see the mic button?
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. I use liquids just through the summer on the roses that are in pots. Because I have to water, frequently, and I just think that whatever fertilizer is there, it winds up going through the pot, coming out the bottom. So I try to keep the fertilizer up that way, and I use a commercially available product from a big landscaping firm that's ground composted pine bark and mushroom compost, and that's my organic addition. I also use that whenever I'm repotting. I'll mix that with. I like to use the Miracle Grow potting soil. It's the one that's it holds water a lot better. So I'll mix those at like 50-50 and throw in a couple of cups of perlite in with that, and that's my potting mix. Springtime, I use just it's an 848 with a minor element package with it, and that's what everything gets. The first fertilizing in the spring, just prior to when I prune. But I kind of beat myself up on. I probably don't keep track of the pH and what's in the soil. I probably don't keep track of it enough. So the big roses out front, they look pretty, but it's hard to be, for me with being a show guy, it's hard to be competitive when you don't have the really long stems with the huge bloom. So, I blame myself for that, for not keeping up with the chemistry of the soil.
Great. Thank you so much for that input. In just a little bit, we're going to open up for discussion. And so if you have questions, go ahead and hold those. You can put them in the chat, but we will have a point of discussion. But we are going to go ahead and ask Satish about watering roses. How often? How much? What's that information?
Okay. There are hundreds of articles written on watering. The thing that we want to do is keep the soil moist. When you peel back the top 1 or 2 inches of layer of your soil, everything below that should be moist. So you have to water it as often as necessary because your soil may be different from one place to another. If it is mostly clay-based with a lot of organic material in it, once a week watering is enough, even in the hottest part of the country. But if it is something that is more sandy, you may have to water more than twice a week. Now, how much water to add? Again, an inch per week and all those things are basic guidelines, but none of them will apply to all the gardens evenly. Best thing to do is an hour after you have finished irrigating your roses, go back, take a narrow shovel or a knife and see how far the soil has been soaked. If it is not soaked enough, that means you have to add more water. People also say 5 gallons for a hybrid tea per week. None of those things really count. You have to actually see the soil and be satisfied that it is soaked and it stays that way. Some time ago, Tom Caruth took over as the director of that big garden in California, and first thing he noticed was the huge water bill. He said, why? They said, we water our roses every day because it is so hot here. He said, no, water only once a week, water deeply, the roots will learn to go down. They said the roses will fade or droop by evening. He said, let them droop. In a week or two, roots will find where the water is, and they will stop foraging for water in the top surface of the mulch, and they will start going deeper. And he was correct. And he converted that garden in a very hot place into a garden that receives only water once a week. So it's very important to water deep and not very frequently. Even a bigger or easier example to see is all the trees. They don't die because you have a 2-week or 3-week drought, but little bushes and shrubs die. Why? Because their roots are not deep enough. So whenever you water in your garden, water deeply if it is in ground. But for somebody like Ray, it will be a completely different ball game. In the pots, you have to water every single day because it drains out completely and it dries up quickly.
Thank you for that. Lou, if you have any insight on, I think the unique needs of Arizona, you've covered it, but if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, one thing, they've got several commercial growers, rose growers in Arizona. Many of them were in the far west side of Phoenix in Litchfield Park area, and several of them have moved their operation to Eloy, which is between Tucson and Phoenix, and they get intense heat in that area. And one thing that they do, they're in a water district where they have to conserve their water any way they can. And they always water their roses in the fields late in the afternoon, usually 4 or 5 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock. And they've got these rows, just like you would have commercial crops where they have the roses in there. And then with these big rubber tubes that they get a siphon effect going, and they have the water flowing through there, and then the water goes through there, and then on the back side of it, it drains into a big collection area where they can reutilize the water down the road. But anyway, so we've utilized that scientific information that they found allows their roses to grow really well. And that's one time we water our roses anytime from 4 to 5 o'clock in the evenings here in Arizona, because it's cooling down a little bit, and then it seems to be more effective in our climate to do that instead of early in the morning, and then suddenly they've gone through 110 degrees. Remember, out in the full sun, it might be 150 degrees. That's in the shade that we're talking about, where daily it's over 100 degrees. So out in the sun, it's much hotter than that, and it is a brutal reality that they've got to deal with. And so that's important to make that distinction too, watering when. And so we found that works very, very well. And obviously earlier I talked about spraying them off early in the morning, which gets the spider mites off, and it allows humidity to there. And our roses grow continuously throughout the summer, where many of the horticulture experts in Arizona say roses will not grow when it gets over 100 degrees, which is not true. If you give it a little bit of shade and you give it enough water, they will do real, real well. It's shockingly how good they will grow. But anyway, that's the only thing I think I would add from what I said earlier.
Great, thank you. Ray, do you have any insight? Don't forget to unmute.
There you go. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. My water bill, as the rose, amount of roses grew, the water bill kept going up and up. So I had a well put in that I just do all the irrigation from a well. So that's the only thing. I put in a well, which if you don't mind dragging a hose around all over the place, that's the way to go.
Ray, I've got a question. Somebody wants to know where you live.
Jacksonville, Florida, North Florida.
Thank you.
All right, Satish, we'll start off with you about garden pests. What do we need to look out for? What diseases?
Okay, as the weather warms up in June, the Japanese beetles will be here. Lots of articles have been written, but basically be happy that they will appear in June, eat for 6 weeks, and they will go without killing your roses. So there is what's called as Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a powder that you put in your soil, but it takes about 3 years for a good colony to get established. They will eat the beetle grubs and that will reduce the number. Never ever put a trap in your garden because it attracts beetles from all around the county, and on the way to the roses or to their trap, they'll stop by your rose garden and eat your roses. So there's nothing you can do about the Japanese beetles. The next thing is the spider mites. You heard about that. The fog-it nozzle is a great idea. If you put it on a 45-degree elbow on a 4-foot PVC pipe, 3/4 inch or half an inch, you can stand pretty far away from the bush ray and you don't necessarily have to get wet, and you can do a good job of that. That works very, very well. Then if the roses are blooming, you have thrips to worry about. And again, American Rose Society is moving away from spraying things, so I will not go into any detail about that. There is no organic stuff that I know of that controls thrips very well. And even more dangerous is chili thrips. If you get a swarm of that on your garden, the whole garden will turn into really bad shape within just 2 or 3 days, because those things will, with the rasping movement, suck all the juices from your foliage and buds. So something like conserve will work. It is supposed to be not harmful to the beneficial insects. Again, it is conserve. You have to apply it every 15 days. Again, I'm not encouraging anybody to do that, but if you want to prevent your chili thrips from eating your roses, that's what you have to do. Then you have the sucking and chewing insects. Again, you can mechanically look for them and remove them. That's a possibility. And there is so-called bud worms that do, when the egg hatches, the worm comes out and drills a little hole into your bud, and then the entire bloom is gone. If you put insecticides, for them to die, they have to come out and eat the poison. So there are very few ovicides that kill the eggs. So best thing to do for that is to look for those eggs that looks like small granules, either green or cream beige or light brown in color. You can just wipe them off. If it falls on the ground, then the worm that comes out is not going to be able to climb up. Those are only pests that I can think of. Ray, do you have anything that I may have skipped?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Sorry, Allison. Pests for me for the summer. I have 1 or 2 Japanese beetles just fly in and check the yard, and if I can catch them, that's it for them. I have a small brown beetle that'll come in and get in the blooms, and pretty much I mechanically pick that off. I go through the yard early in the mornings, and if I find the visitor in one of the blooms, then I make short work of him. That's the new bad beast that's out there now. I think it started in South Florida and has moved up Florida, following like the Gulf Coast over to California. If so far, if you live in cold weather, they haven't learned how to live in cold weather, but they'll ruin your garden, like Satish said, in just a matter of days. I had to, last year and the year before, I replaced like 50% of my roses because the chili thrips got in there, and it was a new pest, and I really didn't know what to do to get a handle on them. By the time I realized what it was, they were already in there having a party. So I do use conserve, and I did a granular merit just before we got this rain a few days ago, hoping that I haven't really seen any of them yet, and hopefully hopefully our really, really cold for Florida this year. We had 20 degrees. Hopefully that's knocked them back some, but it's mostly thrips and chili thrips. That's what I'm mainly concerned of. Probably chili thrips more than anything, because the other stuff will make your bush look ugly, but it'll come back. But the chili thrips get it. It's a job.
Thank you. And you don't have to worry about apologizing. We're all just here to learn more. Lou, do any pests survive the heat in Tucson? Please let us know what you have to battle.
Yeah, the main one during the summer, when it gets over 100 degrees every day, is spider mites. That's what you've got to really focus on. But as with Florida and Texas and California, and it sounds like South Carolina and North Carolina and others, we've got to deal with chili thrips as well. And we found that with regular spraying every morning with that faucet nozzle, it really keeps them at bay pretty well. And we're going to get a little bit of damage, but not the infestations like you could if you just ignore it and don't spray them with anything. And so during the summer, we don't spray with anything other than the faucet nozzle, the heavy volume type. And that works really, really well for us. And then during the spring and then the fall we mean that is in late September to about middle of November. That's our fall. And believe it or not, we didn't get one day of freezing weather this fall and winter, which has never happened before out here. And of course we got that 100-degree heat in March too. So we've got a very unique climate. But anyway, as far as the summer, that's really the only two things we've got to worry about now, and we take care of that by spraying with that faucet nozzle every morning with water. And the roses really like the extra humidity, since we have basically none out here during a large part of the summer. So, but we don't have any issues with, thank God, the different beetles that they have in other parts of the country. And I mean, that sounds like an absolute nightmare to deal with. And as far as regular thrips, we don't really have that big of a problem during the summer. Our blooms are fairly small with the hybrid teas and things like that. But then in November, they get nice and big again after you prune back slightly, and everything looks great, depending on how much you want to actually help your plants out by working with them and not ignoring them during the summer. So that's vital to do that and watering them properly.
Thank you so much for that information. Moving on to what garden diseases to look for. What should we be on the lookout for? How do we know? And then how do we treat? Satish, I'll start with you.
On the East Coast, the primary garden disease is black spot. A lot of organic materials, organic cure or products are recommended, but they all come back and say, my garden doesn't look as good as yours. Why? That's the main reason. You have to control black spot. You can keep the garden clean, remove all infected leaves, put them in plastic and throw away. That's one way to deal with it. But we, probably all three of us on the screen here, are guilty of using Manzate and Compass and some other things. You have to apply at least one contact fungicide and one that works systemically. The contact one kills everything that comes in contact with, including the spores. The systemic ones, such as propiconazole, tebuconazole, and Compass, will get into the plant tissue and prevent the disease from getting established. That's what we have to do. And the package instructions usually say 14 days, but in our experience, where it is very, very hot, like Ray and I know we have talked about it from time to time, we have to do it every 7 days. And the garden stays really clean. I think the fungicides cause minimal environmental damage. So I don't feel bad at all about using those. Then there are other forms of disease called Cercospora, anthracnose, but the good news is the treatment is the same for all of these. Then there is what is called as rust that's mostly seen in California and not so much in South Carolina or East Coast yet. So there are different things to apply for that. And downy mildew is a dreaded disease. It looks a little bit like black spot, but it is contained or limited by the veins on the leaves. So they appear in diamond. The black spot is circular and has a feathery edge. The downy mildew, if it affects your plants, the leaves will fall off very quickly. All you have to do is touch a leaf and it will fall down to ground. And there are so-called phosphonate fungicides. If you use it at least once a month, it's going to keep it under control. Those are the only diseases. Then there is the mosaic, which is the yellow thing that comes on the foliage. It is harmless. It does not spread from plant to plant. Only thing is you can't exhibit such a rose.
Thank you for that. Lou, do you have any indicators of disease for the roses or any insight on this topic?
Yeah, during the summer, we just simply don't have any diseases to worry about. During the spring, we do with mildew, but we're very fortunate we don't get black spot by and large. In very rare circumstances do we. And then I during the spring, since I'm an exhibitor too, like these other two wonderful gentlemen here, I spray weekly, and I don't apologize for it at all. That's the way I learned to do it, and I feel like I'm lazy if I don't get out there and spray with a chemical during the spring and the fall when we really get great blooms, and you want to keep the foliage spotless and have them ready for rose shows. And they reward you with a bounty of incredibly beautiful roses and foliage that you can't get if you just are lazy and don't do it. But you also have to protect yourself too with some sort of goggles. In my case, I wear glasses, but you make sure that you wear a good respirator that has two organic vapor cartridges, and be smart about spraying so that you're doing it early in the morning and not doing it when there's animals out, pets, birds, hummingbirds, bees, and all that. So you do it early in the morning. It's smart when you water the plants really, really well the day before so that they're well hydrated and won't burn at all. But anyway, as far as that mildew, the product that we've used for quite a while that works very well is a Banner Max or Propriazole. Works really well that Satish was talking about. That's a great product out here, and then we only have to spray once every 14 days with that. But then during the other days, we alternate between Maverick Aquaflow for thrips, which are a problem in the spring and then in the fall as well. And then it also takes care of any other problem insects that we might have too. So works very well with that combination.
I'm sorry.
All right, Ray, any indicators of disease to look out for?
Right now, no, because our show season basically just got over. So I've been spraying the stuff to keep the black spot at bay. I very, very, very seldom see powdery mildew. I don't get rust, but I get some of the other fungal leaf spot diseases like Cercospora that Satish was talking about. And, I used the Manzate, Dithanium 45. I also used the Propiconazole, which is, Honor Guard. That's just a generic of something. It's one of the first things that came out. And I also use Cleary's. I use a one contact fungicide and one systemic. I mix them together in the tank and spray them at the same time. And if I'm going to have good roses, they're going to have to look good for me. And I get the neighbors stop by and say, you know, it looks nice. And, you know, I appreciate them appreciating it.
Great. Thank you so much for that insight. So we're at our last question before we open up for the discussion. Ray, since you're already unmuted, can you go ahead and share with us what garden tasks you have ahead, what you're working on leading at this point into summer?
Right now, I've got a yard full of deadheads, and it's just the labor that you just got to go do. You got to go out there and cut them off. That's my thing now. I've got like probably 50, 60, maybe 70 large roses, you know, hybrid teas, floribunda shrubs. But then I've got, you know, 150 miniatures, and, you know, there's a whole lot more bloom out there on the miniatures. And it's just, that's my big project for now, getting out there and don't be lazy, get out there and get it done. And I'll also put the second organic application out. That's pretty much what I'm going to do right now. It's the deadheading and then the organic stuff.
Great, thank you. Lou, do you have any tasks or anything that, while you're working in the garden, that you're...
That's one thing that's very important is deadheading when you have a bunch of roses that are spent like that. And I totally agree with Ray on that. There's a certain number of people out in the West Coast here in the West who don't believe in deadheading at all, and they feel like if you don't deadhead, then you're going to make it more difficult on chili thrips. And I don't know, I understand that logic to a degree, where they think the succulent new growth that comes out, it may be perfect for chili thrips, but I think you got to keep the plant growing. And the only way to do that is you got to get rid of the old blooms that are on there, and that's a very wise thing to do. And so we do that regularly, and it's important to do that. And so we do that regularly. Whenever the blooms come on, we go out there, and we go out there very early at the crack of dawn when it's still 75, 80 degrees, and get that done. So that's probably one thing that we're working on right now too, since we had our bloom cycle several weeks ago, our first one.
Great, thank you. Satish. Oh, you're muted.
To keep the mulch in proper level, if the mulch is thinning out, I'll remulch it. I'll do 100% deadheading, and I'll also remove all blind ends. Those are the three main things. And I'll continue preventive spray every 7 days for the fungus. Make sure you water deeply at least once or twice a week. That's about all I have to do in the summer. But it's important to be in your garden on a daily basis. Otherwise, you'll miss a lot of things that are happening, and it'll get more complicated. If you ignore weeding for a couple of weeks, beds will be run over by weeds very quickly, because anytime there is a fertile soil, weeds grow better than roses. That's my summer program, basically.